Hi, and welcome to a Small, Medium, at Large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate stories and intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank all of you for subscribing to us on YouTube. We have over 1,200 subscribers now. I want to thank you for following us. We're starting our third year and about our 70th show. And I really have been enjoying the amount of interesting guests that we're having from all different walks of life sharing their stories. So today I want to tell you about our special guest, Dr. Stuart Fischer. Dr. Stuart Fischer comes to us from New York City. He was born in Brooklyn, New York, and studied at the Ethical Culture School, the Poly Prep Country Day School, and Yale University, receiving a BA in psychology. After completing basic science curriculum at the Universidad Autónoma de Guadalajara, he spent 3 years of clerkships and externships at Maimonides Medical Center, where he subsequently completed an internal medicine internship and residency. At Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, he also worked with Dr. Stanley Krippner in the Dream Lab from 1976 to 1983. Dr. Fischer then spent 4 years as an emergency medicine attending physician at Cabrini Medical Center in New York City. In 1988, he became the associate medical director of the Atkins Center, the beginning of an 8.5-year professional relationship with the world-famous diet doctor. His parallel interest in media, education, and medical information began in 1991 when Dr. Atkins gave him his own live call-in radio show. After leaving the Atkins Center, Dr. Fischer opened a private practice as an associate of Dr. Alan Pressman, a renowned chiropractor and nutritionist. He continued his own radio show sponsored by Dr. Pressman and wrote his first book, Dr. Fischer's Little Book of Big Medical Emergencies. In 1999, Dr. Fischer relocated his practice to the east side of Manhattan, where he continued his clinical medical career while expanding his presence on television, radio, and in multiple national magazines and newspapers. This led to a second edition of his emergency book and a new original self-help work, The Park Avenue Diet. Distributed by Penguin Random House, both these books were extensively promoted through diverse media as well as on WOR's radio, The Park Avenue Diet Show. Dr. Fischer closed his private practice in 2015 and became the medical director of several nursing homes in Brooklyn and the Bronx as an attending physician under the auspices of Athene Medical. In 2021, he published an original collection of short stories in the style of Anton Chekhov titled The Invisible Worm That Flies in the Night. In 2023, he released his fourth book, a thrilling murder mystery called The Mystery of the Neuromuscular Junction. Let's welcome Dr. Stuart Fischer here today. Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, good. I see we have 2 New York accents here today on the show. This is kind of fun. So
I've got a true Brooklyn accent.
right. Well, my father was raised in Brooklyn. My grandmother was born and raised in Brooklyn. So we grew up in Queens. So we're of the Queens family.
I could tell.
Right. So I always ask this question to everyone. So I'm going to start my first question I ask all my guests, which is, as a child, did you feel drawn or any kind of knowingness about wanting to be in the healing arts or medicine? And did anyone in your family, were any of them doctors that inspired or supported this career and path that you chose?
Well, I did at age 9 tell my parents I wanted to be a doctor. And when they asked me why, I said to help people. Decades later, one could say a lifetime later, whenever I am asked on a podcast or an interview, why did you become a doctor? It's the same answer, to help people. All of my friends at Yale and subsequently were in show business. And I had my own theater company at Yale, and we did a couple of plays, including The Fantastics and Bertolt Brecht's The Threepenny Opera, of all things. In other words, a very difficult theater piece. And I again toyed with show business, but I thought it would be selfish to go into show business. And I would rather help people of all shapes and sizes in my life as a physician, and that therefore I was pre-med at Yale, and I definitely made the right decision because I told myself I can always go into show business, but I cannot always be a doctor. So if you will, this is my form of show business right now, doing interviews and being me and writing. As you've heard, I'm very honored to hear the titles to the way you said them, 4 completely different books that I could think of no one in my life who could have written that. I don't think anyone I've ever heard of has written a diet book and a book of medical emergencies. It's just not really, they're not really two they're two planets, parallel universes perhaps.
And
But
then
the
a thriller murder mystery that
murder
doesn't fit in with
mystery,
that.
and the best of all is the short story collection in the style of Anton Chekhov. I read 100 Chekhov short stories as I was writing my own, and that book is semi-biographical. It has incidents from my life that made me become the doctor who I am, but the short stories can function as entertainment also. To your other question, was anyone in my family also a doctor? Only one member was, my great uncle Abe Fischer, who would be right now, I would say about 110 or 120, also did his residency in internal medicine at Maimonides Hospital, same
Oh,
place. My salary, if you'd like a laugh, at Maimonides Hospital was $23,000 a year. And you're not going to believe it, but I was able to afford Veuve Clicquot champagne, a half bottle, every night that I came back exhausted from Maimonides Hospital, which was every 2 out of 3 days. The Clicquot was $12, which meant $6 per night of Veuve Clicquot, and dinner was cold noodles in sesame sauce and a pork bun for $1.25. So this is how I coped during my very difficult and challenging internal medicine residency. Uncle Abe was the doctor for 2 celebrities. One was a Mr. Al Capone, who lived in Brooklyn, and the other was a Mr. Dutch Schultz, who had a crime syndicate here in the Upper Manhattan, Lower Bronx, and they were both murderers and bootleggers. And my Uncle Abe treated both of them for an illness. And I asked Uncle Abe, what did you treat Al Capone for? And he would not tell me. And I said, the man was a murderer. Why aren't you telling me what he did? I was 16 at the time. And Dutch Schultz was worse than Al Capone. And Uncle Abe said to me, I will only answer if they were nice and if they paid their bill. So I said, okay, all right, go ahead. So he said Al Capone was nice and he paid his bill, and Dutch Schultz was not nice and he paid his bill. Years later, I went back to my professor of medicine, Dr. David Grove, the greatest doctor who walks the face of the earth. He and Dr. Krippner are among my 3 greatest teachers of my life. 3 people, Dr. Grove, head of Maimonides Internal Medicine, Dr. Stanley Krippner, we can get to him in a little bit, my greatest friend of a lifetime. And third was a English professor at Yale who taught me how to speak up. He would have challenging arguments about opera and literature, and he taught me to blurt in with my opinion rather than keep quiet. Meanwhile, I came back to Dr. Grove long after the residency, and I told him about Uncle Abe and his refusal to tell me more about Al Capone and Dutch Schultz. And I said, Dr. Grobe was 84 at the time. I said, Dr. Grobe, what did he treat them for? And Dr. Grobe looked right up, and without a second, he said, syphilis. And I said, what? He said, this is before penicillin. And he said, salvarsan. Salvarsan was what they used to treat syphilis with before they used penicillin. And salvarsan, if you don't know, is arsenic, basically. And it is given either intravenously or, to put it mildly, with a Foley catheter. You'll have to look that up if you don't understand, because the children might be awake, so I don't use language. I'm careful about my language. Anyhow, boy, was I surprised. That Dr. Grobe knew within a microsecond what he did with both, although I have no idea how he knew this, but actually Uncle Abe was one of Dr. Grobe's professors. But it struck me that this is a very colorful life, but I actually had a message for Dr. Grobe also. And I said, Dr. Grobe, now I have worked in an emergency room, and I too have treated murderers and thieves and other people. And these are some of my most colorful stories about my emergency room years. I said, but I did not treat anyone like Al Capone or Dutch Schultz, but I did treat a very famous fictional mobster. And Dr. Grobe, who was the greatest humanitarian, you'd have loved him. He taught us all people are the same. There's no judgment in social classes when you're a physician. It's not good to do it anywhere, any other time, but as a physician, you're not there to fix up society. You're there for a medical reason. And you never discuss these things outside. So I said, Dr. Grobe, I treated a very famous fictional character who was a criminal. So he said to me, who would that be? And I said, Tony Soprano, James Gandolfini, who had passed away, and therefore the Privacy Act doesn't work after you pass away. So he looks at me and he said, you treated Tony Soprano? I said, yes. And Dr. Grobe stood up at his desk and went, I can't believe it. He's my favorite actor. I can't believe it. And I said, Dr. Grobe, you were the person that taught me not to be judgmental and say someone's better than someone else. And Dr. Grobe said, you don't understand. He's a fantastic actor. My wife and I would watch that show every week. Anyway, I said, stop it. I don't stop it. Of course, he was impressed, but impressive enough was James Gandolfini coming to my office. And he had very minor issues, by the way. He didn't have any serious issues. And he was a delight. And he indeed looked like a 6'2" murderer, but he was very nice to me. And I have treated murderers, and they're part of my legacy. Incidentally, in my short story collection, which I think is a rip-roaring entertainment, one of the short stories is an imaginary encounter between my Uncle Abe and Dutch Schultz. And it's what would have happened if this famous bootlegger and mobster and a psychopath would come in the middle of the night to see my Uncle Abe as a patient, and what the encounter would have been like. And I actually, in my mind, had to recreate some of Dr. Abe Fischer's expressions, and invent dialogue, which was a great pleasure for Dutch Schultz, who indeed is given into the bladder salvarsan and also intravenously. The short story collection has other wonderful morsels in it. Anyway, I always wanted to be a doctor. I am right now, literally, in my first day at Terence Cardinal Cook Nursing Home, which is run by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. It's right on Central Park. And this is about my 7th or 8th gig, if I could put it that way. in the nursing home industry. They love me. It's very hard work, but I'm pleased to say that this summer I'll be 74 and I'm still practicing like, to me, I feel like an intern. I have I couldn't tell you I have the cellular makeup of an intern, but I like the surprises. I like challenges. I like going from one thing to another. And that maybe will explain the 4 books, but as Dr. Krippner knows very well, I am a very big opera fan, actually probably a crazy opera fan, and I've been to 23 Rolling Stones concerts, and I have 14 backstage passes from the Grateful Dead. And I cannot possibly, I've tried to think, how did this happen? And I've given up completely.
Well, I have to just throw in a couple of things because you're mentioning so many people that I have had some kind of little different interactions with over the years. And I also, like your doctor friend, was in love with James Gandolfini and was very addicted to The Sopranos. And I was brokenhearted when I heard of his passing with his son there, finding him. And I happened to be in New York visiting my friend, and she had her car parked in a very expensive parking lot or something. And while we were standing there waiting to park the car, James Gandolfini got out of a big black SUV and bumped right into my body. So we kind of had a little kind of physical smash together. And when I looked up and I saw it was him, I couldn't even remember that his name was James Gandolfini because I was starstruck in the moment of this guy that I thought was the sexiest man. And in life, he was the sexiest man. He had a tremendous charisma in that one moment. And he gave me this look like he was on the show and I shouldn't have bumped him or something, you know? And he walking away from me and just looking at me like this. And I was like, is he trying to just pretend he's Tony now? Or I'm not exactly sure. And I didn't, I was kind of apologetic at the same time, but it was all just a coincidental physical accident that I cherish. And I just think he had a tremendous amount of really beautiful energy. I really liked who he was in that present moment.
Yeah.
Then you talk about your family taking care of mafia men. And I grew up with that because my parents were car thieves on Park Avenue. They weren't doing the diet, they were stealing the cars.
They went to the right place.
Oh yeah, and my dad, because of what my dad did as a kind of a one-man operation, the FBI and the New York Department of Motor Vehicles had to change the way they register vehicles in New York because of what my dad had done. And he had his own system that fooled all of them. So they wanted to meet him. And he ended up being in Lewisburg Penitentiary. And before he went, he spent time with Frank Costello. So Frank Costello and him would share eggs. And my dad didn't smoke, so he traded eggs for cigarettes with Frank. And he was invited into all these, once he was in prison, they all wanted him to be part of their group, but he decided to go on a spiritual path, became a vegan, changed his life. So prison to him was the best thing that ever happened to him. And my grandfather, he was in the Jewish mafia. And so he went to Sing Sing prison, and he was the enforcer for Tootsie Herbert, who was this very good looking Jewish mafia guy that's why they gave him the name Tootsie, because he was so good looking. Anyway, so I just want you to know I really get the New York and I babysat for somebody who was in the mafia when I was growing up there. And I don't know, I never thought of it as anything except that they said, don't ever say that word in our house. That's I said one day when I saw.
The mafia I was very pleased with because Al Capone set aside money for Enrico Caruso to appear in the Chicago Lyric Opera House.
Wow.
He was a big supporter of Enrico Caruso. There's to me, there's the mafia, and then there's bootleggers, and then there's other criminals, and way down are Harvard students from Harvard University. I graduated Yale, so you can understand where that's coming from.
Well,
And I
the
think
thing about
that my low
theater,
opinion of Harvard, I'm glad to say, is reflected in today's headlines. I think I will leave it at that.
well, actually, my mother-in-law, who was the first Black woman to be play a role on Broadway that was not a slave or servant. And she was an amazing teacher, became a dean. She was my algebra teacher. And her, I was going to mention something about her history. Oh, so my husband went to Yale. He went to universities. He was accepted in all the top universities except for Harvard. And my mother-in-law hated Harvard for the fact that they did not accept him as a student when he was
Yes.
given full scholarship to Yale at 16 years old. So she was very proud of his time at Yale. And when you're talking about theater, he loved the theater, my husband. And he said when he was there, that was when Meryl Streep was doing theater.
Yes.
It's 77.
So was I.
He
So
got
was
to-
I.
Oh, so you two might have crossed over.
She was in the Yale School of Drama, and I don't think I met her then, but a lot of friends interacted with her. I have stories about that. Christopher Walken was at Yale, Albert Inarado,
And I think
very
Christopher
great,
Lloyd.
Harry Hamlin. I think of names as a very good list of names. Sophia Loren's son, and it was a very good time for college. But once medical school happened, things got more serious because medical school is very difficult, and
Mhm.
even worse is a medical residency. That was 3 delightful years of my life, and as I said, I made $23,000 a year.
You probably
And
never slept.
I did not sleep every third night because we had to be on call every third night. And I found that if I slept if 2-3 minutes or a couple of minutes, I'd feel even worse.
Mhm.
So the easiest thing to do was just to stay awake for the night, and I would do lots of busy work, and then the next morning I would somehow cope through the next day. Meanwhile, when I first got my schedule for Maimonides Hospital, I looked at it and I was on call every third night. Literally, it was amounted to 4 years with an additional externship year. And I showed it to Dr. Abe. I saw my uncle was at Grand Rounds every week on Wednesdays and a lot of other conferences. He'd get all dressed up in a suit. That generation of doctors was completely different, completely different. They had much more integrity, much more, they were very religious. They were much more humble, believe it or not. And they knew much less, which is interesting. There were no antibiotics. I could list what there wasn't. And yet the doctor-patient relationship was actually stronger back then. Right now, I'm sitting next to a computer screen, which is where most doctors and nurses spend their time. And I think it was the JAMA many years ago, the Journal of the American Medical Association, said that a physical exam is really not necessary these days. With all the technology that we have, a detailed physical exam, like what I was taught in medical school, is not necessary. But there's one thing that it does. Just by the doctor touching the individual, there's a bond that's formed. And I was taught, just touch them a little bit, just something, so they feel the human touch while you're doing your emotional best. So, but anyway, I was on call every third night. So I said, and Abe, look at this. I'm on Monday, I'm on Thursday, I'm on the next Sunday, then I'm on Saturday. And he said, well, we didn't have a schedule back then. So I said, how could that be? How did you not have it scheduled? He said, very simply, we were always on call.
Oh.
He was on call 7 days a week, 52 weeks for 3 years, period. And then he said, and I told him I'm making $23,000. he said, guess what my salary was? So I'm only going to ask you to guess. Because excuse me,
12,000?
minus $110 per month. Your residency, you made nothing. You had to pay room and board to Maimonides Hospital for to stay for the privilege of staying there and eating their blintzes and other Jewish foods. And his family had to bring him food. He had a wife and kids at the time, and he made no money for 3 years. However, when he got out, he overcompensated. That was the difference in those days.
I want to share a quote you said about your teacher, Dr. Grubb, because I thought it was a beautiful thing and part of the thing that's missing today. I have a lot of complaints about dealing with doctors and medical situations now. And one of my biggest complaints is the one that you're talking about, is that I see a different person each time and all they do is look at a computer screen,
Yes.
whatever that screen says, and sometimes it's not correct. And when I say, no, I didn't have that, they never remove it. So your doctor wrote, which I wish other doctors would say, the patient will tell you what's wrong. You just have to listen long enough. I thought that was a beautiful teaching that he gave you. And I wish that doctors today would listen to this.
It's more profound than even you might have thought, because you can take it another way, which I like too. The human body is talking to you, and you will find out what's wrong if you listen long enough. So when you see someone sick, and let's say they have abdominal breathing, where the abdomen goes back and forth, or they're breathing and their shoulders go up, or they have big neck veins, the jugular vein is distended, or if they're talking harder, or whether it's hypothyroidism. These signs and symptoms from the human body are clues as to what's going on under the surface. And if you run in and all you're used to is computer numbers and letters, you won't appreciate it. For example, one of the things I was taught to do is feeling atrial fibrillation. No one I know that I have worked with in the nursing home industry or before has even heard of this, let alone it does it. And Dr. Grove was one of the ones who showed us what you do. Patient has to have atrial fibrillation. You put your hand over the heart. And when you put your hand over the heart, you feel the other hand. And when you feel the other hand, with the left hand I'm showing you is feeling the right hand, you will feel a bag of worms, which is absolutely incredible. A bag of worms. The bag of worms is moving, it's kind of writhing, but again, you have a hand over the heart, feeling this, and you will feel on the right hand, the one close to the heart, something poking you under the hand. The first time is the bag of worms, is how they describe the heart during atrial fibrillation. The heart is, if you look at a cardiogram, the heartbeat is 150 times a minute, 170 times a minute, something very tremendous. However, it is not moving. Despite the fact that you see all these little heartbeats, the top of the heart itself is not beating, but wiggling. Like I'm trying to illustrate it from various perspectives, but the top of the heart is wiggling. This is called physical diagnosis. When you use your hands and your ears and your eyes and your brain, hopefully, to figure out what's wrong with someone, this is one of the most spectacular ones of all. I remember hitting the ceiling the first time I felt atrial fibrillation this way. Of course, we have a cardiogram now, which Abe worked on for the first cardiogram in history. He also had other limited resources back then, There were no blood tests back then, by the way, but physical exam was very important. For example, in acute appendix, ruptured appendix, appendicitis, physical exam can give you clues long before blood tests or x-rays do. It kind of varies. Some illnesses are very hard to diagnose. One of them is endocarditis, an infection of the heart valves, very difficult to diagnose in any way whatsoever. But there actually are little skin sequelae from it, skin signs from endocarditis. So if you just rush in and take a look at someone or from 20 feet away, you're not going to see this stuff.
Mhm.
The other thing is that when you let people speak, you find out things about them, bad habits, personal myths, if I could use the term Dr. Krippner uses. These things are also clues if the patient is health conscious, behaving themselves, doing preventative medicine. And when people ask me what health is, I tell them health is something you do for yourself. It is not something that is done for you. So I've, just like Dr. Grove, I've made up several mantras that I teach to medical students, nurses, anyone who listen, that remind me of the way medicine used to be taught, which was experiential and older doctors teaching younger doctors. And it's an art form. It's not, and it's a holy profession. To me, it's like a priest or a rabbi or a shaman, if you will, sometimes. And to me, you're doing something, trying to prolong life that is it's a calling. When people, I also like to remind doctors that the famous expression is not, I know everything about medicine, but it should be, I am practicing medicine. You don't say, I know everything about medicine that there is to know. And you do say, this is practicing medicine, which means you never get it right. And which means you got to be attentive. You got to be a doctor. When people ask me, when do you get time off from being a doctor?
Never.
And I tell them, since July 1st, 1980, it's been one big day.
I want to ask about Dr. Stanley Krippner, who's also a very dear friend of mine, and the reason that you happen to be on my podcast, or we never would have even been brought together if not for him. So I know that you worked with him at in Brooklyn at is Maimonides, is that it?
3 times.
At the Dream Lab.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you did experiments what went on in the Dream Lab? Did you conduct an experiment, or is there a story of a particular work that you might have done together you could share?
I can tell you our most famous story. Hopefully it'll be filmed someday with Tom Hiddleston as me.
Okay.
Hopefully, and maybe they'll do a musical with Hugh Jackman just afterwards. I was a volunteer at Maimonides Hospital when all the kids at Poly Prep were doing driver's education. I still don't drive, by the way. I've never driven a car in my life. And it's a little, in New York, you don't need a car.
You don't want to drive.
You don't want it. What the tickets cost and everything else, and the doctor's license plates don't make a difference anymore. I was working in the dialysis unit, the heart transplant unit they had at Maimonides, in the pathology lab, one of the biochemistry labs, and the summer of 1967, the summer of love, as it was called, they offered me a job in the dialysis unit, or maybe you want to work as a messenger boy with the surgeons, or maybe you'd like to work in the Dream Lab. And I said, what? I was 17. I said, what? They said, oh, we have a ESP and dream telepathy lab. And I started laughing hysterically because Maimonides is an Orthodox Jewish hospital. They don't allow non-kosher food in. There's a rabbi on the premises, et cetera, et cetera. So the head of volunteers was very embarrassed. And she said, no, no, you can work in the dialysis unit. I said, no, no, I want that. I want that one. So I became the assistant to the secretary of a professor, psychology expert and professor. Her name was Marge Schneider, and I was her assistant. And she told me, do not talk to the doctor. Please do not disturb him. You're a file clerk. Please, he will talk to you, it's okay, but you don't talk to him. So I worked, I guess, about 3 or 4 days, and one day in comes a gentleman, and he, oh, hello, oh, good to meet you. I do a pretty good imitation of Dr. Krippner. And he introduced himself to me, and no sooner did he introduce himself to me than he said, would you like to be in an ESP experiment? What do you think I did? Well, come on. So I said, of course. So he told me that I would have to come to the Dream Lab late at night. It must have been about 9:30 at night. And I would have to stay there overnight. And it was actually the Department of Psychiatry. They had given Dr. Krippner a whole floor, and Montague Ullman, a very famous psychiatrist, allowed Dr. Krippner to do his experiments on one of the floors of the psychiatric facility. Anyway, the task was Dr. Krippner would be staring at a picture, actually a postcard of an art painting during the night. It was one image on a picture, and he would be looking at it over and over, and I would be in the next room getting an EEG. And for an EEG, they had to paste electrodes on my head to get the brain waves, and they had to plug me into, it must have been EEG unit, the room that they were using, because it certainly wasn't for Dr. Krippner alone. And I actually was very close to the wall. The wires were not very long. So they pasted these things on my head, and it was Dr. Krippner's son, stepson, and stepdaughter helped him out for this experiment. I had brought a big package of oatmeal cookies because they said, if you're going to get hungry at night, everything's closed, get some food, have them, put it somewhere. So in case you get hungry during the night, there's always something for you to eat, a snack for you to eat. So I go to sleep. And again, my mother was not very happy about this, but no one listens to Jewish mothers anyhow. So, sorry, Mom, sorry. I'm just doing it for a podcast. It's not really true. And now, bolt of lightning comes through the window.
Yes, I know.
Or a bird flies smash right into the window.
I've had it happen.
So Dr. Krippner is staring at this thing, and whenever I had a certain brainwave, rapid eye movements, REMs, the stepson and the stepdaughter would wake me up. And fortunately, I wasn't hungry for most of this. And I told them before, put the oatmeal cookies somewhere. Don't leave them in the room with me. You keep them, and if I need them, I'll buzz you and you'll come in and I'll get something to eat. So I would say every hour and a half, they'd wake me up when I had rapid eye movements, which meant I was dreaming. And during these dreams, right afterwards, they'd wake me up and they'd ask me what I was dreaming. So the last dream that I can remember was people walking against the snow. There was a snowfall and people were walking in the snow as the snow is coming down. And that's the only thing I remembered about the dream, this image. Finally, it's the morning. And I'm in pajamas. I'm literally in the wall, stuck in the wall with wires. So I buzz Bob and Carrie, Stan's kids, and I said, you can come in now. Bring me some cookies, come in and detach me from this. Complete silence. I buzz again. Bob, Carrie, please come in. I'm very hungry. I couldn't hear a thing outside in the corridor. And I got really mad. And I said, I am pulling the electrodes out of the wall right now. Where are you? Nothing. So I pull all the electrodes out of the wall. They're still stuck in my head. And I go into the next room where they were, and there's a nice wrapper of oatmeal cookies, and there's no cookies.
I've eaten them all.
They ate them all. So I'm in pajamas, no less. So I was very upset. And I took the elevator down Dr. Ullman's building into the lobby of Maimonides Hospital. And a guard comes over and grabs my hand. And he said, "What are you doing here?" Remember, I'm in pajamas.
Right.
I said, "They stole my cookies." He said, "What floor are you coming from?" I said, "The fourth floor in the psychiatric center. Come with me. Come with me right now." And the guard took me back, pushed the floor. The elevator door opens. There's Dr. Krippner and Bob and Carrie smiling. And they said, "We didn't want to wake you. So we left you in there, and then we went for breakfast." And Dr. Krippner said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." So he sat me down and he showed me 6 postcards with art postcards with images on each one. And he said, "One of these was the one that I was dreaming about all night. And one of them had people walking against the snow in a Japanese painting that Dr. Krippner says is very famous." I said, "That's the image." He said, "You're right." And I immediately had this, I could feel my blood pressure going down. And I'm turning even red now thinking about it. And that was the beginning of my friendship with Dr. Krippner. And that was 1967, August of 1967. 25 years later, approximately, Dr. Krippner, one of my friends, and I were in Japan in December, and we were in Kyoto. And sure enough, we're walking to one of the Golden Temple in Kyoto, very famous temple. And guess what? It started to snow. And we didn't have snow outfits, and we're all bundled up. And I said, "Stan, that was not only a ESP dream, that was a precognitive dream." And oh, yes, it was. I remember that too. So I had a double whammy from that experience. I worked with Stan in 67, and I worked with him in 1970 and 71. I worked on a paper called The Dreams of Pregnant Women that he published. And I did some other work that was published in the Journal of Orthomolecular Psychiatry. I was pre-med by this time. So I was pre-med at Yale and working in an ESP lab. And I like the Grateful Dead, and I like Wagner, and so the image that you get is, and I even discussed it with one of my colleagues here today. I don't know, I'm just not like anyone else. I'm not like any other doctor you've met, but I'm resigned to that now.
Well, I wish I had a doctor like you out here that followed these particular things. I have to say, Mickey Hart lives right down the street here from me, about a 5-minute drive. In fact, in a property that I looked at in the late 70s to buy. So I knew exactly what his property looks like before I heard, made it into an amazing, incredible place. And I'm wondering then, was this material, this exact experiment, because I've been a subject in psychic phenomena experiments and paranormal research for scientists since 1998. And I'm currently in one right now for Dr. Dean Radin with a group of 50 different people around the world. And our task is to affect a special box that I have here that I'm not going to show you, but it's here next to the computer, and I'm supposed to interfere with the lights and sensitivities and things that were built inside the box, which is sensitive to temperature and other things. I won't know the results or what the experiment is actually geared toward till we finish it. Then he'll let us all know. But I love doing these kind of experiments like you're talking about. And I'm wondering, did they then come up with, because I've been a dreamer, precognitive, I do precognitive remote viewing, I'm whatever, was blessed with the natural ability to do these things without being trained. Is there data, or is there, on these papers, was he able to finally say, yes, we can interfere with people's dreams while they're sleeping because of situations like what you just described? Was that the end result, that they felt this was all possible, or what was the end result in the lab?
Well, there was 3 years between that and when I actually worked with him a full summer. 67 was a couple of weeks. 70 to 71 was the whole summer both times. And my answer to you is ask him. He's the expert. And tonight, I hope you dream about people walking against the snow, and then you know that there's really something out there in the cosmos.
Oh, well, I know, I ask
taught
for
me.
dreams. I ask for dreams for information, and it comes in the dream, and I get the information.
But
So,
he taught me in a way. It's more than you think. The human body is more than you think.
yes.
And what is it? I don't know, but there's something. And I have had many unusual experiences, paranormal life experiences. Even, well, I could give you another one. Our time is closing, but I want to give you another one that I'll make much shorter. In 1976, years after Dr. Krippner left Maimonides Hospital and moved to California, this is 4 or 5 years later, probably. He was in California. I was in Manhattan, in the middle of medical school. And I was actually doing my first externship that month, October of 76. I went into a room, and on K2, the floor was K2, Cronish 2. And I suddenly thought about the dream lab, and which had closed by then. And I thought about Dr. Krippner, and I thought, oh, this is so sad. You know, he's not here anymore. But then I said to myself, don't worry, because he's always hovering over your head. And the image of him hovering over my head, I kept thinking about when I went home. I decided to call him in California. So that night I called him, and his wife Lily picked up the phone. And I said hi, and we were good friends. And I said, put Dr. Krippner on. If I got to talk to him. He's not here. So I said, well, listen, when he comes in, tell him that I'm calling, and I just had to speak to him about something. I was thinking of him the other day, but he's not here. He's very sick. So I said, what's wrong? She said, he had a bleeding ulcer. He's very, very sick. He's in the hospital. I said, oh my God. Could you tell him, please tell him that I called, please, or give me the name of the hospital. Oh, she said he's in Maimonides Hospital. I said, what? He was making a tour, a lecture tour, and he got sick, and he's in Maimonides Hospital right now. So I said, where is he in the hospital? She said, Cronish 3, K3. I was standing in K2 when I had the image of Dr. Krippner hovering over my head. I went back to the room that I was in K2, where I had that image. I went up the fire exit to the room directly above it. Hi, Stuart. Oh, it's so good to see you. And He, he was so happy to see me, and he knows this story, so you can ask for his version of it. But that's a real story. The way that I told you, obviously I left out the surprise for last. I didn't know what of all the luck to be directly under the person that is hovering over your head by one story. I was in K2, that is K3, same room, one floor up. So when I tell myself about allopathic medicine and all these things I've learned about the human body, and then I have this whack ass stuff happening to me also, you become more of a skeptic about reality. And to me, it's a very good thing. It means the human body and the human psyche are unknowable to these mysterious objects, and we're lucky if we can wrap our hands around any component of it, any. So I consider medicine endlessly fascinating still. And I, just like I told you, I practice medicine. I don't know all of medicine. When people, there are things that I'm telling you, I have no idea what they are. There's certain areas of medicine where zip, if you gave me a test, I'd get 0. But to me, that's an interesting thing, that there's so much out there, and yet there's also so much else out there that we really have to appreciate the blessing of life, the blessing of friendship, the blessing of love, and the blessing of health. And health is one of those things where one can say, use it or lose it. It's especially our troubling times right now. These are the worst times possible for millions and millions of people. And this is the exact wrong time to neglect your health. Of all times maybe you saw the head of Kellogg cereal said that instead of having dinner, people should have a bowl of cereal instead of dinner because it costs much less. And when I heard this, I thought this is just what we needed for a country struggling with obesity, where 60% of people are overweight or obese, telling them to eat empty calories to save money. So I still feel like I'm a knight on a quest when I deal with this. And it gives me the motivation and the excitement of a new day tomorrow. So this is how I can sustain this kind of profession decades after I started it. All my Yale friends who were physicians have retired. I'm the only one. And when people ask me, why am I still working? I have 2 answers. I gave you the serious one. I will now give you the frivolous one. When people ask me, why are you still working in medicine? I tell them, theater tickets are expensive. So I hope I've given you a little window on the disparate sides of my nature, but I'm very proud to be a physician. I'm very happy to have been one of your guests.
Well, I'm so glad that you are teaching other nurses or doctors or people that you encounter that the teaching is also by showing who you are. So by being who you are and practicing whatever medicine you're doing now in this next part of your life, you're also then teaching younger people.
Yes.
And it's a very important, it's like, I assume your Dr. Garb is gone now, or is he no
Oh,
longer?
long time, yeah.
Okay, so he's not here to carry this information, but you are. And it's a wonderful thing that you didn't just decide to go off and live on an island somewhere and just be alone by yourself. I just wish that there were more doctors with these thoughts that you have, because I find that the part that really annoys me is that I've seen both lifestyles now, because I was raised with no doctors, and I've seen amazing healing without medical intervention. And then I've seen Western medicine save my own self, from dying. And so it's been very hard for me to figure out how to make both of these together. But when you go to a regular doctor, they don't want to know anything about whatever else you're feeling or whatever else is going in the body. They only have their thing set in their mind, and they only want to give me drugs. That's all there. And then when I go back, I said, I have diabetes now. All everything you give me is more drugs. And then you're giving me insulin, and now you want me to take some other crazy pill. And if I just question it, they get pissed off. They get angry that they're telling you what you're supposed to do, and I'm asking questions about
It's
it. They
their,
don't like that.
but it's their fault. The doctor must be a communicator, speak your language and get into your brain quickly and correctly and empathetically. And this is as easy as playing the violin. And some people, many physicians are the opposite.
Absolutely.
But Dr. Grobe lives on as the character in my murder mystery, The Mystery of the Neuromuscular Junction. He is a detective and a doctor at the same time. I don't want to spoil the murder mystery, but I had to recreate him in my head and give him dialogue for 200-page book. So I actually had to imagine, some of the things I've talked about in the last hour became they're into the mouth of the character in the book. And he has to solve a mystery before someone kills him. And I gave the manuscript through Stan to Dr. Grobe's son. And Dr. Grobe's son said, "You got it down. This is how he spoke." And he actually would read us mysteries by Sherlock Holmes when we were little kids. And in fact, the central thesis of the book is that Dr. Grobe is Joseph Bell, who was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's teacher, that was the stimulus for Sherlock Holmes. So it's all wrapped together. Well, this is
I have one more. We have to do one more touching on your books and I know that, if you can summarize in a small paragraph, but I feel like this is the most important question that I don't want us to leave without, which is, can you give us a brief definition of that word diet? And did the Atkins diet versus the Park Avenue diet?
I got the answer.
And do they differ?
The Atkins diet is food. My way includes personal mythology guided by Dr. Stanley Krippner himself. The word diet comes from the ancient Greek diatasi, which means how one leads one's life. So if you don't have a lifestyle that is motivated towards health and good weight, changing foods does nothing. Nothing. So that's the central unifying thesis of the Park Avenue diet in a nutshell, which I do not allow on my diet, by the way.
Well, I want to also say I'm going to purchase your Park Avenue diet book because I like the idea that it doesn't encompass just food, because I feel like we're made up of spirit, body, physical and other things.
Dr. Krippner is a contributor.
Oh, wonderful. When we heal, we need to heal all those parts, not just
his stuff is great.
Food.
His contribution to the Park Avenue diet, I told him, is the best thing I ever read from him.
No,
it's a real self-help text and I said, I want the audience to hear you speaking. This is not a presentation to the American Psychological Association, which he's been honored by dozens of times.
Yes.
I said, this is you speaking to someone with medical problems. Use actual dialogue that you would say to them. Anyway, that's a good book. The Emergency book's a good book. The murder mystery is good. My heart belongs to my short story collection. It's only $5, but on Amazon. But it's a personal favorite. Now, no, Dr. Krippner's not in it, but I know Dr. Grobe's not in it. I'm in it, and Dutch Schultz, the psychotic murderer, is in it.
That's hook enough to get us interested.
Yeah.
So
thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, I want to say this show is actually going to air right after Stanley Krippner's show. So when our listeners are watching this show, they will have just then seen Stanley Krippner's book release of the memoirs of his incredible legend of a life that is 900 pages of amazing stories that span through so many eras of time and history, that it's not just about his life, it's also about what was going on in the world. The fact that he was sitting in the audience when Marilyn Monroe was singing "Happy Birthday, Mr. President."
Yes, yeah.
I mean, so I'm hoping that our listeners will see his books are available in the previous show to yours, and then also find out about the Park Avenue diet at the same time in this visit.
Great, great.
And I'm just gonna see if there was anything else I had left here to cover, because oh, yes. There was something I wanted to ask you about. I have two more things, and we're in good time if you have another 5 or 10 minutes
No, no,
left.
I got a call during a
Okay.
medical
No,
call
I
during our,
just want to mention about your upcoming podcast, that I wasn't sure if.
to be announced, not ready yet.
Okay, but there is something that will be coming.
We're working on it now.
Wonderful, and you'll have audience and listeners and interactions. Looking forward to it. Please keep us posted and let us know when you do that.
Very good.
Wonderful. And in ending, is there anything about exercise or health tips or snacks or anything you want to give advice to our listeners before you
Read the Park Avenue, yes, it's in the Park Avenue diet, day
So-
by day.
read that, and they will get some self-help that they could help to change their life and maybe figure out.
Particularly from Dr. Krippner. His section is I told him I wouldn't write the book without him.
That's wonderful. I am bringing him mashed potatoes, which I just saw on one of your sites you're not supposed to do, but that's what he asked for, so
It doesn't count.
I said,
When-
oh, God.
When he visited Saturn and Jupiter, that's what they ate there.
And do you know Nancy Rhodes, his friend that's in the opera there?
No,
She produces operas in Manhattan.
no,
Amazing woman he introduced me to. If you get a chance, she was just on our show. All right, so I want to thank you so much for being here with us, and have a wonderful day taking care of helping and healing with other people. You're a wonderful energy and an inspiration at 74 years old. Our skin should all look as good as yours. Okay, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us here today. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we look forward to hearing from all of you on social media channels. Have a great and wonderful day, and don't forget to remember, share your stories, because stories can heal. And thank you so much for Dr. Stuart Fischer being with us here today.